Psychology of Strengths and Weaknesses. Welcome to the Blank Slates 101, where we strive to understand our world. Today we delve into Sun Tzu's The Art of War, focusing on the psychology of strengths and weaknesses and how it aligns with his warning to avoid prolonged warfare. Sun Tzu famously said, "There is no instance of a country having benefited from prolonged warfare." Chapter 2, verse 6. Why? Because extended conflicts drain resources, exhaust morale, and expose vulnerabilities. Prolonged warfare isn't just a physical struggle, it's a psychological one. It gives your enemy time to adapt, analyze your weaknesses, and strengthen their own position. Let's unpack this further. Sun Tzu advises, the skillful fighter puts himself beyond the possibility of defeat, and then waits for an opportunity to defeat the enemy. Chapter 4, verse 1. This speaks to the importance of positioning, both literal and psychological. By leveraging your strengths while concealing weaknesses, you maintain the upper hand and deny the enemy opportunities to exploit you. In the modern world, think of prolonged struggles where both sides dig in, refusing to yield. These situations often lead to stalemates, escalating costs, and public fatigue. Sun Tzu would argue that this happens because one or both sides fail to identify and exploit critical psychological opportunities. Instead of seeking decisive action, they allow the conflict to drag on, to the detriment of all involved. Sun Tzu's insights also reveal the dangers of overconfidence. He warns, he who knows when he can fight and when he cannot will be victorious. Chapter 3, verse 17. Misjudging your strength can lead to devastating consequences. Overextending in an attempt to demonstrate superiority often results in vulnerability. This is as true today as it was in ancient times, where campaigns that began with bold moves collapsed under the weight of hubris and mismanagement. The psychology of weakness, on the other hand, revolves around perception. Sun Tzu writes, appear at points which the enemy must hasten to defend. March swiftly to places where you are not expected. Chapter 6, verse 5. Strength isn't always about brute force. It's about creating dilemmas for your opponent. Modern tactics often mirror this principle, using distraction and misdirection to divide focus and create openings. Consider situations where smaller forces or nations achieve victories against more powerful adversaries. These outcomes often hinge on the effective exploitation of perceived weaknesses. By avoiding direct confrontation and instead targeting points of vulnerability, these entities embody Sun Tzu's principle that the clever combatant imposes his will on the enemy, but does not allow the enemy's will to be imposed on him. Chapter 6, verse 2. But how does all this relate to avoiding prolonged warfare? The answer lies in the balance of aggression and patience. Sun Tzu cautions, if the campaign is protracted, the resources of the state will not be equal to the strain. Chapter 2, verse 3. The psychology of war isn't just about defeating an opponent, it's about maintaining the capacity to do so without self-destruction. Prolonged conflicts often erode that capacity, leaving both sides weaker and more vulnerable to external threats. Modern parallels are easy to see. When conflicts drag on, the initial objectives often become secondary to survival. Resources are depleted, alliances strained, and public support wanes. Victory, if achieved, often comes at a cost so great that it barely feels like a win. Sun Tzu would call this a failure to understand both your own limits and the limits of your adversary. So, what can we learn from all this? First, recognize that strength isn't just physical, it's also psychological. Knowing when to act, when to retreat, and when to wait is critical. Second, remember that exploiting an enemy's weakness doesn't always require overwhelming force. Sometimes subtlety and strategy yield the greatest rewards. Finally, heed Sun Tzu's warning about the dangers of prolonged warfare. If victory cannot be swift and decisive, it's time to reevaluate your approach. Stubborn persistence may feel like determination, but in the end, it often leads to exhaustion rather than triumph. In our world today, where struggles can take many forms, military, economic, or ideological, Sun Tzu's lessons remain as relevant as ever. By understanding the psychology of strengths and weaknesses, and by avoiding the pitfalls of protracted conflict, we can navigate these challenges with wisdom and foresight. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the art of war. If you found this discussion insightful, be sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, remember, true strength lies not just in force, but in the strategy behind it.